Je vais basculer en anglais comme le premier talk est en anglais, donc, pour nos auditeurs, téléspectateurs, non, je sais pas comment on dit, nos spectateurs anglophones. So I have a few informations to give you before we start. The sessions tonight will be recorded, so you will have the link of the support that Emmanuel will show and the video in a few days. The talk will last between 30 and 40 minutes, and then we will have 15 minutes for Q&A. So please use the Q&A section to ask your questions, and you will be able to vote for the question you want me to ask first. You can also find a chat section to discuss between the attendees and the panelists. And you can also change the display in the top right, I think, to find the one that suits you best. So now I will introduce Emmanuel, that is our first speaker. He speaks from Oregon in the US, but he is from France. He will explain later. Emmanuel is a founder of Plus QA. I don't know if I say it right. You will tell me after. Thank you. He works on a daily basis with more than 60 testers and worked for the testing and the launch of companies like Nike, Airbnb, Walmart, Dropbox, and so on for their websites and mobile apps. So Emmanuel, I will stop and then it's your turn. I will turn off my video too. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the introduction. Can you see my screen? Okay, so can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay now.
All right, cool. Well, bonsoir tout le monde. So this talk is going to be in English for a couple of reasons. First of all, to make sure that we have as many people as we can to understand what is the talk about. And then secondly, just because I'm more comfortable articulating accessibility testing in English than I am in French, unfortunately, at this time. However, if you have any question later on, whether they're in English or French, I'm happy to answer those. This talk is going to be about getting started with accessibility testing. Just a brief introduction about myself. So I'm originally from Montpellier in southern France. I moved to Portland, Oregon in 2003 after finishing university. And I started working in the software testing industry in 2004. I worked on testing software and hardware for a few years for a chipset company, and then worked for a year and a half in a digital agency, working on a variety of e-commerce, interactive experience, and just digital project in general. Around 2008, I left my job and started Plus QA out of my basement. As Thomas explained, today we have a little bit over 65 people. And we focus on functionality and compatibility, and also we have a strong focus on accessibility testing. My first experience, with accessibility testing was in 2012. At that time, we got a project, and it was actually for a large US retailer. So we were working on their mobile application, and this is where I basically discovered accessibility. So at that time, accessibility was not a priority for a lot of companies, and it still is not a priority nowadays. But it's a lot more, much bigger subject now that a lot of companies have to adopt and learn. So in 2015, we created an internal accessibility research team at Plus QA. And today we have about 15 people that only work on accessibility on a daily basis. And about a year and a half ago, we started hiring testers with disabilities, meaning testers who are blind and also have a hearing impairment. So For the agenda, I'm just going to give you 4 different points. First, overview about accessibility, trying to explain you a little bit the type of disabilities, what are the regulation and the guideline around accessibility as the second point, and then the importance of building accessible apps. A lot of companies, again, are not, are using that as a second thoughts. We'll talk a little bit more about why it is important and required. And then what, is the most interesting point for me, at least, from everything I've been exposed around accessibility is building a diverse and inclusive team. So in this specific case, I will give you guys some example about how, how we've done that. So I will start with like the different type of disabilities. So about 15%, according to the World Bank Organization, 15% of the world population has a disability. So that's about 1/5 of the global population. In the US alone, 26% of the population have a disability, which is a fairly large number. So pretty much 1 person out of 4. In that number, 12 million of people have difficulty seeing, 11 million people have difficulty hearing. And then the numbers are, depending where you pull those numbers, they're not always super accurate, but approximately over 19 million people have a physical disability. And then 15 million people have cognitive, or emotional function difficulty. Moving this thing around. So what I try to break down a little bit the different type of disability, so everybody has a good understanding about what type of users are we talking about and how those people are affected, but also the type of tools and technique that we look at for when we test. So the first one is visual. So in the group of visual are affected people that are blind, who have a low vision. People were also colorblind, but also deafblind. And so to test, typically, you're looking at screen reader magnification. So that's what some people use, to view some content. Color contrast testing is for, people who are colorblind. And also, again, screen reader and different tools for people that are blind. In the second group, I have under hearing, it concerns people who have hearing impairment, and that varies from mild impairment to profound hearing impairment to loss of including deaf. So what you do when you test for those is you basically need to consider video caption are provided for video content, that you have some text alternative for text where you have non-text content, and then eventually when you stream content or replay some videos, having interpreter for a sign language for that type of content. I'm sure you guys have some questions, so I would just go through the different slide, and then we'll compile a list of questions, and Thomas can pass those at the end of the presentation. The physical, so just to be clear, it's not, you typically don't have obviously one type of person that has slowly one disability. You can have some people with various degree of disability. So again, this list is not applicable to everyone in every single case, but it's it can be a combination. So under physical, it includes users that cannot use a mouse or a keyboard. And so when it comes to testing, what we typically do is, we execute different test methodology and also different type of testing. So it goes from keyboard testing only to mouse only testing. Of course, tools like such as a screen reader and voice over pass. And then, also usability testing when images are turned off. As far as speech, well, that concerns people that cannot speak. And so speech disabilities, There are also different techniques and tools for speech, but in terms of testing, it means testing for alternate means of communication and using speech, tools such as a speech recognition tool. So. Then the last one is cognitive, so that includes people with dyslexia, ADD, and epilepsy. So for this type of users, you need to make sure you have alternative for time-based media that are provided, in your website or your mobile application. Make sure so that your users have enough time to read and to go through the content. And again, the usability when images are turned off. In this case, we also use mouse-only testing in some cases. So next, hope nobody has left yet. Everybody's still here. It's a lot of information, but we'll go through a little bit the accessibility guidelines. So it can be a little bit overwhelming, at first, and it might seem a little bit complicated when you're not familiar with the subject. But again, I try to articulate that in a way that it's easily understandable and that you can navigate through the content and the different ideas, and also understand all the different type of guidelines included in accessibility testing. So originally the W3C created the Web Accessibility Initiative, and under the Web Accessibility Initiative, they created the Web WCAG. So the most regulation are based on WCAG 2.0. However, the latest version for the WCAG or version 2.1 guidelines. In accessibility testing, you actually have three different testable criteria, the 3 levels that are A, AA, and AAA. Majority of the testing we do is usually based on WCAG 2.1 and then AA. AAA is the extra level. Typically, that some company do. In most cases, companies that we test for AAA are in the medical field or health field. Number one, sorry, perceivable. So when we test for accessibility, we basically break it down into 4 different criteria. So the first one is perceivable. So you want to make sure that text alternative are provided for non-text content. The second is time-based media. So you have an alternative for audio and video content. That the content is adaptable for any type of content you publish, which is actually separate from style. And then distinguishable content that can be seen and heard. Now we'll have on the next few slides, I have a few examples to illustrate a little bit what are those, what I'm talking about under each one of those items. The second one is operable. So you want to make sure that it's accessible, keyboard accessible. So someone using a keyboard should be able only, and not a mouse, should be able to have the experience of the functionality of an app or a website, just like any other users has. Any users that doesn't have a disability. Second thing is enough time. What it means is that you want to avoid content loading too fast on your website. In some cases, seizure. I don't know if everybody is familiar in French with the word seizure, but it's basically a crise d'épilepsie. So you want to avoid content that trigger a seizure. So any flashing content or mostly flashing content, I guess, is the main example I would list. But you want to avoid that. Sometimes, when you, for example, recently I was looking at a website. It's a toy manufacturer, and they had a lot of content on the landing screen, of their website, flashing content, and it's really distracting and also not very user friendly for people with disabilities. So it's usually recommended to avoid that type of content. And then you also want to make sure that it's navigable, and you have some input modalities. So for navigable, you want to make sure that your content is actually easy to navigate and well structured. And as far as the structure, I will talk about that in a second. The third item on the list is readable, understandable. So you want to, try to simplify the text content. And so for predictable, you also want to make sure that the page operates in a consistent way. I think overall, just, whatever, especially in testing, often, me and my team, we talk about consistency. And I think, when it comes to accessibility, especially, it's really important that, a user with some disabilities is not thrown off guard, with some bigger consistency around the navigation and of the page and also of the website. And then, under input assistance, you want to be able to helping users and avoid and correct their mistakes throughout the navigation. So the last item on the list is robust. So you want to make sure that it's compatible, which means anything that is done on the back end, works with assistive technologies. Often, companies we work with tend to. So the company we work with, I would say, like on a daily or weekly basis, or they have accessibility well embedded in their process and in their team. But often, we have some companies contacting us and asking us to rush into accessibility because it's something, they launched this website and they realize that it's not accessible at all. And, they might get in trouble legally. And so it's something, obviously, they didn't think about early on. But, on that note, so very briefly, this, all those things are, articulated around POUR. So perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And this is like sort of like the core skeleton for WCAG guidelines. So it's good to always keep that in mind. So I will jump into some example next, but just very briefly, what I was trying to say around accessibility is something to consider early on in your process. We do work, for example, with a design team. And the usability research group where we get, some of our testers involved, including the one, with disabilities. And, we partner with those UX and UI team to provide some feedback, as soon as they start, varying wireframe, creating, some proof of concept. So, and then, again, from a development standpoint, it starts with design to development, or you need to make sure that, whatever is coded is actually compatible with assistive technologies. And then, of course, on the QA team, you got to make sure that you understand all the different criteria for testing. So I would give you 3 brief examples about bugs that we found. So Decathlon.com. I know Decathlon is very popular in France. It's now in the US. I hope you are not part of the Decathlon accessibility team, because just looking at the website, we spotted a few issues. So I listed only a couple of them. But if you load, basically on this specific example, if you load the Decathlon.com website on the Android devices, the search button that appears at the top of the page is not labeled. So for example, if you're a blind user, the only feedback you would get from that button says button and not search. So in this situation, in this situation, you cannot basically, as a blind user, you won't know where to find, to search for a product. So what I did in this case, we basically, under the guidelines, there's about 12 to 13 different guidelines for accessibility. And, what you do as a tester, I think, when you work with a developer, you want to include the guidelines number. So in this case, I articulated, this violates WCAG 4.1, 4.1.2 name, role, and value. It's a level A violation. So as a tester, once you start with accessibility, you want to give some indication to the developer, about what the regulation is around the issue you came across. It's also, of course, important, to provide the browser and the OS version in which you found that issue. So second example, again on decathlon.com, search field cannot be accessed with voiceover command. So what does that mean is, so for example, I look at this page on, using Safari voiceover on desktop, and the search field does not receive any screen focus. So the focus shift from the Decathlon logo in the header straight to the secondary navigation, and it basically skipped the search bar. So again, if you're using voiceover and you're not, you're a blind person, you would have trouble understanding where is the search. And this is, again, another accessibility violation. And again, in this case, if you use Jira or any other bug tracking reporting tool, you want to make sure, you explain what the issue is, what browser and tool you use specifically for that, and what the violation is, including, the link to the violation. My third and last example is Lego. So Lego.com, in this case, the terms and condition link does not receive keyboard navigation focus. So, for example, somebody visually impaired who doesn't use a mouse and actually use just a keyboard won't be able to open and read the terms and condition page. This is, obviously a violation and in that form, and it should be keyboard accessible. I think it's really important, for this type of company to actually be accessible, because there's a lot of children. I actually follow, one of them on Instagram, that build Lego. I enjoy Lego with my kids. So I follow this, this young French kid. I think he's 10 or 12 years old, and he built a lot of Legos, and as I was following him on Instagram, I look at his, I went on Lego and started looking a little bit at the accessibility of the site. And unfortunately, again, there are some accessibility violation. And I think what's not that great is really like they prevent, children in this case to actually, access, any of the user account functionality, or, the VIP account or anything else, related to that. So obviously the person who is visually impaired will need assistance from somebody else. So again, in this case, I listed, which the violation that it's related to. So these are just, three brief example, and I think it's it should give you a little bit of an idea about, okay, if I am a visually impaired person, or if I use a voiceover command or a screen reader, these are the issues I have, and obviously it shouldn't be the case. From multiple perspective, every user should be able to access any piece of content on the internet. So based on that, you might be wondering at this point, okay, so he's talking about, all the things we need to test and how, we can test it. And there's a lot of information. So where, how do you test? And so very briefly, I think when we test, and again, there are, depending who you work with, there's a lot of different plugin and different solutions out there. But, typically, I will talk for my team at least, for when we test, website, for example, on Windows, we use, 3 different type of tools: NVDA, Narrator, and of course, JAWS Screen Reader. On Mac, we typically use VoiceOver, and then on iOS, we test on VoiceOver and also Android TalkBack. For Chrome desktop, you can also use, there's plugin like accessibility plugin that you can use for testing, such as Wave Evaluation or Site Improve. I would also share, some link at the end of the presentation where, you can actually find those links too. But I think, something that is really important when you test is to make sure that, you always test one version back. So right now, for example, obviously iOS 14 came out, there is, I think there's a strong push, from companies like Apple and Google, to have, accessibility feature. There's a strong focus, I would say, on accessibility. And you can see that, every time there's a new OS version that is being released. So, right now, for example, I would say, if I talk to a client or a developer or anybody else, I would say, I think it's best to test on iOS 13 and on iOS 14, because you want to make sure that, all users, all the accessibility feature in your app or your website are working on both OSs. Same thing for Android, Android 10 and 11. I mean, obviously, Android is always a little bit more challenging because all the different versions. But, when we talk about, getting ready ahead of the project, planning and having a test strategy in place early on in the project, I think that's something, if you're the QA manager or the QA lead, that's something you should put on the radar of your team to say, hey, we're in January 2020, there might be a new Android OS release this August. If you're writing, the scope of work, wireframe, and technical documentation early in the year, to include that in your scope, because that's going to impact, obviously, the budget also for your team. And also, you want to make sure that you're not caught off guard, 3 months later when you actually start testing and, there's a new version out with new accessibility feature and you have not included that in your plan, in your budget, and also obviously in your test case. So now, what I've been the most involved with, within my team is building a diverse and inclusive team. So when we started, so very briefly, I would articulate, that part of the presentation on 4 different points: creating a mission for your team, sharing new tools and techniques of testing, hiring language specialists, because really that's how I see it, at least, somebody that has a disability is similar to, I have experience in localization testing. And when you speak a language, you are a language specialist. And I think people that have a disability or, expert in specific tools. And I think, that's the approach we've had over time is, looking, when we hired testers with disability, is the thinking, those people know more than we do. They use those tools on a daily basis. They have a much better understanding about the tools and languages. So that's why it's important to have testers with disability on your team. And then, the 4th point would be about bringing value to your product. So let me start with the team mission. So what we did, on at my company, we basically created, sort of a mission for our team. And I think, it's articulated around 2 principles. The first one is to make the web, the web more accessible. That's the thing. It's, when when people who have a disability, or if you have people who have a disability, in your surrounding or even at work, I think you're a little bit, you feel more like, hey, you're on a mission, like to actually make sure that, the people that should be able to access the same thing that, you are accessing. So that was, sort of the first step for us. And also, I think, again, it's a little bit outside of just QA, but, talk to, if you're a project manager, a QA project manager, or test lead, or even a product manager or developer, anybody related on your team to a product. But I think the strong focus is on obviously on the QA lead within the team, is to talk to HR, and if you want to hire somebody with a disability on your team, I think you might have to go, the person that recruits in your company or the HR manager will probably have to go a little bit outside of the usual network. And at least that's what we did. We had to try to, reach out a little bit outside of, the usual recruiting website to make sure that we would be able to find, expert in testing that had some different type or degree of disability. So, and then, the 3rd point is, I wrote, share your knowledge within your team and build a solid structure. So what we did over time is we really created a strong wiki for the entire team. And there's a real collaboration, from testers with disability and, the team that was there before, to understand, okay, what are the tools that, those guys use, and how can we, how can they teach and train, other testers that have previous experience in accessibility testing, but were not as familiar with those tools. So this, second thing is around the tools. I think, a lot of time when I first talk about some clients or some team, we work with, and when we talk about tools, it's pretty much never people actually think about the tools you're using. So I listed, the tools that are accessible that we use on a daily basis. The first is Jira. It is accessible. It could have some improvement, but it's usable. However, I'm sure if you do audit, on accessibility, you would find some bugs to report. The second one is Google Sheets. So the feedback that at least I got from our testers, that are blind is Google Sheet works well for them on Mac, and Microsoft Excel works well for them on Windows, but they don't necessarily like to switch. Microsoft Excel on Mac, or they do prefer on Windows. And so, what we did actually this year, so we used TestRail and X-Ray with some of the project. However, we're working away from those tools because they are not accessible at all. Yeah, clearly, X-Ray is it's a great tool to manage and execute test case, but it is not accessible. It's a major blocker for us. So what we did this year, we actually created a custom test case management tool internally, and we had our testers with disability and also one of our developer that has a strong background in accessibility work together. And the feedback from the different testers on our accessibility team is it's by far the best tool we've had. So it's something to consider if you have the time and resources to invest in that. But again, some of those tools, unfortunately, like TestRail or X-Ray, are not very friendly for people with disabilities. I mean, testers with disabilities. Third item is going back to the language specialist. I think again, somebody that has a disability have a much better understanding. You can learn a language for 10 years. There will still some pieces of language or cultural or just from first-hand experience that you will not understand. I always put it in parallel with localization testing. I've known I worked for over a year in the localization group. We had 24 different nationalities and language. And some people sometimes speak two language, they can write two language, but there's definitely a native. You cannot replace a native speaker. And again, the experience, the benefit for the rest of the team is that all the other testers have learned, from our testers with disabilities, how to grow as testers and also how to work with assistive technologies. And then from a product value, so if your team is not really sold on the idea of hiring a tester with disabilities, I think it's really important that from a design standpoint to a development and also QA standpoint, testers with disability will definitely bring strong knowledge to the product. They can pretty much work with any team, and they will increase your product value. If you go back to the numbers, I was giving on the early on in the presentation, clearly, when you have 1% out of 4 in the United States that has some kind of disability, you are basically preventing all those people from accessing, your e-commerce or your mobile application or your sports app, workout app application. And you're basically losing millions of people from accessing your product. In addition to that, I haven't really talked about that because that's not necessarily our main focus. It's you're legally required to be accessible. So if you're a French company and you launch a product in the US, well, by law you are required to answer to the WCAG guidelines. And you need to make sure that your website is accessible for all the different type of users that have disability. And so yeah, again, overall, this will increase your product audience, and again you will build a stronger audience where people are like, wow, this company sell product or has a mobile application that is accessible, and it's just simply the right thing to do, and it's also required, legally required. So I will end with why is accessibility important? So again, by law, you are required, to be accessible. One of our test lead, Abdul, is, the way he articulated is, very simple and very straightforward. As he always says, accessibility is a basic human right. I think, now we live in a societies where if you want to rent an apartment, you will have to you will have to submit a form, through a website, or if you do, even like legal, renewing your driving license or booking a trip, all those things, should be accessible for people who have disabilities. And so, it is, a basic human right in that sense. Again, insisting on the fact that, if people are not sold on your team, and if people are like, oh, it's going to be too much effort to onboard, somebody with a disability, I think, for us, again, we've tried that, and it's been a success for us, at least, in the past year and a half, and onboarding testers with disabilities has really, bounded the team together, our accessibility team. It's a really strong team. There's a really strong, I would say, like, team spirit. And they really, really help out each other and look after each other. And on top of that, there's definitely a strong sharing knowledge among this team. And I think, overall for us as testers, in the IT industry, there's always a lot of talk, right, about diversity and what we should do, and also, being inclusive. And I think there's a lot of good intention. But I think for us, from where we stand in the QA industry, and I'm talking, as a tester, I started as a tester, from QA lead to QA manager, and owning a QA company now. I think we have a responsibility to also initiate that change and actually try to get ourselves outside of our comfort zone. I think learning new things should be the motivation for each individual, and reaching out to people that maybe you never thought about you would be working with. Well, I mean, I can tell you from my experience, you will learn a lot of things that you didn't necessarily suspect until you tried it. And the investment, sure, it is a little bit of time in the beginning to put things together, to put some knowledge together, and for us at least it was a wiki, but once you build that knowledge, you can really build a team around that and really grow, just as a QA tester or as a QA manager in general. And that's it for me. So I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very, very clear and very interesting. It's my opinion, but I think a lot of people will agree with me. So I will ask the first question: which strategy could we put in action for a website that is already running and running for years? What could we do?
So I think the first thing to do is, it depends, of your level of knowledge of accessibility. But I think the first thing is to try to get educated on the guidelines, understand what are those guidelines. You have a lot of training online that you can find across different websites. Again, I will provide in the slide I have a list of resources, and I will make this obviously the slide available after this talk. But I think what you need to do is, once if you already have some experience and knowledge in accessibility testing, is to do a preliminary audit. So for example, if you have like a 10 or 20 page navigation website, just start with that. Go from WCAG version 2.1 guidelines, AA standard, and try to do a full pass of the website and assess what area of the website are really broken, and try to prioritize the bugs based also on the violation. So if, for example, I mentioned earlier the example of flashing content on your website. If your website, when you first load, you have a bunch of flashing content, well, you can start as, okay, this is a major violation. That's going to be a major accessibility issue, and you want the developer to address that first. So first step is, to do an audit, present that to your team, and see how, establish that over time into a schedule. Like, okay, we will tackle, this amount of bugs first, and then, the highest priority, and then, lower priority next. And then over time, implementing, a strategy around accessibility, and, instead of, oh, we launched this website, now let's take a look at the accessibility.
Okay, thank you. I'm not familiar with the WCAG guidelines. Is there a classification for the violations, or?
Yes, yes. There's the way it's described is, there's 12 to 13 different guidelines. And there is a classification, well, at least the ones I know of from our internal knowledge database, we have different ones classified. But I think it also depends, how overall the user is affected on your website. So yeah, but there are classification and there's different degree of severity.
Okay, thank you. Next question, do you use an automation tool to help you identify some accessibility issues?
So I know there's different services, for test automation for accessibility. In a way, like when you do use, sometimes some plugin, it is some tool that, it basically execute, the testing and flag, some of the issues. However, on our end, we do a majority of our testing manually.
Next question, very good question. We like the first question. Accessibility is often taken into consideration when the product is already in production.
Yeah.
But do you have some advice to include it in an iterative way in your product building?
Yeah. So, what we've seen, at least over the past couple of years, is originally, a lot of project we were working on, accessibility was, again, an afterthought. And it would be like, okay, you have sometimes like testers, embedded, some of our testers are embedded with the client team. And they would say, hey, we're done, with all the functional and cross compatibility, cross-device compatibility testing. Can you guys do a pass on accessibility? And so what we'd see now is actually, the accessibility team is more often merged into the product team. So you will have, for example, you will have like one designer, one developer, and one tester. And so now, in some cases, we have like a functional tester and then an accessibility expert. And what we've been trying to do, at least over the past year, is try to, train people that are interested in accessibility. So, somebody that is like a manual, front-end manual tester, goes through some training and understand, the basic of accessibility. But yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit to test in accessibility. So, you can keep somebody busy all day long just testing accessibility on his own. So, but I think, again, it's, if you're a manual tester or a QA lead or even like a QA project manager, I think, over the next, if you haven't, really considered that, it should be part of your plan. It should be part of your personal plan and your goal for the next maybe 6 months or 2021 to understand what is accessibility, how it works. Even if you never really do that much of it, if you manage a team of testers, you need to be able to understand that. And that goes back to like prioritizing issue, understanding how a specific violation will affect a specific type of users on your platform or for your product.
Yes, and Lisa put a message in the conversation that teams that were dedicated to accessibility, then it was better for all the project. It was easier to test and easier to develop.
Yeah, and I think again it's as I was presenting, I know it's always for people that are not familiar with accessibility, it's always a little bit overwhelming. First you're like, oh wow, or like all those article around the poor guidelines. There's quite a few regulations, but it's training, it's reading and training and educating yourself on those guidelines, and experience come with time, and also experience working with testers that have disabilities. And I can tell you from first-hand experience that somebody with disability, once the person is up and running and trained, the tester will go as fast as any other different testers through test case. On our team, we have one of our tester with disability. He's literally go through hundreds of test cases a day and find dozens of bugs. And again, I think on the developer side, it's when you provide good detailed bug and when you have a first-hand user impacted by those issues that can actually put things in context, the developer will be more, I would say, like motivated to fix the issue and understanding, oh wow, okay, this is not, if this person say it's a critical bug and that needs to be fixed, then it is a critical bug. It's not a matter of an opinion.
Thank you. Next question. Do you have any quick win ID, something cheap to implement, but that can improve accessibility a lot?
Quick win idea? Quick win idea. I don't know. When we started, when we really started putting a team together, we had to do some research first. So that was about 5, 6 years ago. And I think, the quick win is just to start reading about it, trying to get yourself familiar. Sometimes, you find, how do you call it, like cheat list, of things you should be looking for. But really, it's building your own knowledge around what fits what fits you well already, as far as understanding all the different things. It's a little bit the same when you test the e-commerce. People are different way to look at how to test the e-commerce. But from me personally, for example, I'm not going too much in detail, but if I test the e-commerce, I like to break it down into 5 different components, and then go from this component, create test case for each component, and test those components, each one of those components separately. And I think for accessibility, maybe start with understanding the guidelines, look at the different degrees of compliance, and then go maybe just go from there.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I will combine 2 questions that are not similar, but you talked about the WCAG in the US for that's the regulation for accessibility. Are there differences in other countries, or is it the global standard?
It is the global standard. So I think, again, each country has different laws, and I can't really talk from a legal standpoint, right? But in the US, legally, you are required, and there are sometimes people that try to companies that sell accessibility as a service, they go with the approach, oh, you know what, if you're not accessible, you can get sued, which is true. A lot of companies, somebody mentioned, I cannot get management to agree to it. It's like, well, maybe explain management. They might find themselves with a lawsuit, and on top of that, they will have to make their application or their website accessible within 3 to 6 months, maybe, or something like that. So, but the regulations are the same. There are some, WCAG. So I put that in the resource page. There is one page, let's see, in French. It's translated in a few languages, but I think after that, for the the guidelines themselves, you will have to read them in English. But I think, for example, French standard are based on, let's see if I have the link right here. I will post that also in the chat. But yes, it is the same introduction, l'accessibilité du web. So here, I'll post that real quick. Sorry. And you can start from there, at least for French. But again, we've worked with companies in Europe, and I know for a fact that some countries have different legal framework around accessibility. But if you follow WCAG guidelines, I think you will meet the accessibility standards. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question. On a positive way, have you ever noticed any business results directly related to accessibility, like some positive results?
Yes. Well, I think some of what happened is, when we originally started putting a team together, we actually didn't have that much work. When we started hiring testers with disabilities, we didn't necessarily had the work to get to keep those people busy right away, but we're like, okay, this is going to be more like a long-term investment for a team, and for also individual, and for the company. And I think again a quarter of our team today is accessibility. So I don't know if that answers the question, but in terms of business, yes, it is it's been a positive result for us. And what happened to us was, some clients came to us 2-3 years ago and were like, hey, do you know anybody that does accessibility? And I mean, we as a company were not the best into sales and marketing, so we're like, yeah, actually we have an accessibility team. And they were like, wow, great. So we could get started right away. And I think that's something else, again, going back to, the audience a little bit on this conference is, if you're a tester or a QA lead or QA manager, like, get started now if you're not familiar with it, because sooner or later it's going to be on your list. So just be ready for it.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll take a last question to stay in the limit. Do you have any advice on accessibility by design or automatic accessibility test?
So the accessibility by design typically, I'm probably not the best person to talk to because I'm not involved in that on day-to-day basis. But typically what we do is on our side is we have a QA project manager for accessibility, and also we get our testers with disability involved in design review with our client. And we've done that with teams in the US and actually teams in Europe. And again, there's different when it comes to usability. Of course, it's really vast subject, but when we it's really, the feedback on usability and design really comes from different people that are first impacted by user experience. But just quick note is I think what's very interesting about accessibility is often we talk about, like yesterday, security testing, we talk about functionality testing, usability testing. And I think, the thing is, accessibility, it actually touches a little bit each one of those domains. When you test for, when you test the compatibility testing, you want to make sure that, the functionality and compatibility actually work through accessibility standards. And, accessibility does have a strong, or the usability does have a strong impact on the accessibility of the product. So it's, I think overall, it's just not something, you should isolate in the box and say, oh yeah, we do accessibility once we're done with everything else. Try to get it involved early on in the project.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for the talk and for the question and answer.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to talk at the conference. Very pleased, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye now.